What's up everyone, I'm Gooshy, and in this video we're going to be doing an in-depth analysis of Cyberpunk 2077. As always, we'll be using Bartles' taxonomy of player types, which categorizes players on why they play a game, to determine how much of the game satisfies each player type. We'll go over the good things and the bad things that this game does right for each category, giving some recommendations on how they could have done it better, and finally giving each category a rating. If you'd like to learn more about Bartles' taxonomy, or if you're just interested in finding out what kind of player type you are, I recommend checking out my video, which I'll link a card here and in the description below. I highly recommend checking it out because the more that we understand ourselves as gamers, the easier it is to determine what specifically you like about games that we play. So with that, let's get started. Alright, to start it off, if you guys don't know about Bartles' taxonomy, I'll give a little rundown. There are 4 player types: the Socializers, Killers, Achievers, and Explorers. The first player type we'll go over are the Socializers. Socializers really cherish interacting with other players, or in the case of single player games, really immersing themselves into the world that the game provides and the characters within it. Along with the main story, there's a ton of side quests for you to explore, with so many characters to interact with in Night City. But unfortunately, you're not around much of the characters to really build a relationship or a connection to. To me, even the main quest characters felt more of like a side quest character. Even the characters that you're closest to, like Jackie, Panam, Judy, Rogue, are only present for portions of the storyline. Technically, Johnny's with you throughout the whole game, but he only pops up periodically during cutscenes. It would have been awesome to see more of a connection with Johnny, not just on a story level, but also integrated to the mechanics of the game. A really good example is Shadow of War or Shadow of Mordor. Since Talion and Celebrimbor are basically the same character, Talion inherits some of the skills and abilities that Celebrimbor has, and as you use these moves, you visually see Celebrimbor to further indicate that connection between both characters. Another way they could have deepened some connections with characters within the game is something that Skyrim did. As you slowly made alliances with the different factions within Skyrim, you then have the option to have allies follow you as companions. This honestly would have been perfect because you make alliances with different gangs, and there would be that trade-off of siding with one gang over the other. I know there's that glitch or bug within the game where you can have Judy or Panam follow you around, but having this mechanic fully integrated would have been awesome. Under the Socializer category, since we don't have multiplayer yet, I can't judge the game yet on how players interact with other players, so I'll probably do an updated review later on when multiplayer comes out. Alright, the next player type that we'll go over are the Killers. For multiplayer games, Killers are all about the competition, and in this case for single player games, Killers are all about the combat and wrecking all the NPCs and enemies within the game. And overall, I'd say the combat was just alright. I actually enjoyed using all the weapons and gear provided for us. I really liked the addition of hacking, as it was kind of like an equivalent of magic in fantasy games, using some kind of resource management, such as mana to use magic, or in this case, memory and RAM to perform quick hacks, as well as gathering gear or taking perks to reduce the cooldowns, also collecting and crafting new abilities to use. But the area that I think the combat fell short is actually through the enemy design. We are presented with different factions such as the NCPD, the different gangs that you encounter, along with the different weapons and gear that they provide. But as you fight them, the basic player game loop is pretty much the same. This means that if you have a build that works, you can use it all throughout the game without changing your playstyle. Although enemies did visually look different, and some of their movements differ, these differences didn't affect the way you played. I mean, even the Cyber Cycles and the final fight against Atom Smasher, which were meant to be mini bosses throughout the game, were honestly pretty disappointing. And all the base mechanics were there. We had mechanics like status effects, armor stats which will reduce damage taken, different movement abilities, enemies that use different weapons, like melee weapons, guns, and netrunners that fought at a distance. The NCPD also used mechs, such as flying robots, humanoid robots, and turrets placed around the city. With these base mechanics, we could have had different classes of enemies. For example, tank melee enemies with a bunch of armor, some evasive netrunners that either flied or were super fast, and more mechs. I'm honestly surprised that only the NCPD made use of robots. Even for enemies that just use guns, there were some snipers and and bulkier enemies that used light machine guns. So that was a decent start. But I wish they went a step further and used more diverse equipment. There's a bunch of cool equipment that the player has access to, like recon grenades that will reveal your position, which could counter stealth builds, the shock status effect that will reduce movement and counteract fast moving abilities like Stand Viston, and cyberware like Berserk, which will reduce damage taken. So with all the base elements there, I do think they could have done a better job creating more unique enemies. Onto the next player type, which are the Achievers. Achievers really cherish in-game validation on the amount of work put into a game. And these are usually portrayed through collectibles, such as unique weapons, super rare skins, an emblem that shows off in menu, or a trophy received in each platform's achievement system. And there's not many collectibles within Cyberpunk, and I'd say the closest thing to collectibles are the iconic weapons. The iconic weapons can be displayed on your wall in your apartment, and are used to show how many of the iconic weapons you've collected throughout the whole game. However, since some of these iconic weapons can be missed throughout your playthrough, and are just rewards for completing a certain mission, rather than a reward for an achievement accomplished in the game, it's harder to categorize iconic weapons as collectibles. Again, Cyberpunk had all the baseline mechanics to appeal to Achievers. Because of the rarity system and the randomized loot, they could have used some of the looter-shooter mechanics to get these iconic weapons. In looter shooters, unique weapons are RNG drops from higher level difficult activities. Most of these activities are meant to be replayable. Cyberpunk had activities such as the boxing fights or firing ranges, which could have easily be used for replayability in getting these iconic weapons. Other activities like clearing an entire area of gang members or helping the NCPD clear out all the crimes within a certain district could have also been used to satisfy Achiever player types. Even stepping away from looter-shooter mechanics, achievement rewards could have been handed out through things like gear, especially with all the unique factions and gangs, and the trade-offs for the different alliances you make. Certain clothes or cyberware could have been faction-specific. And we have a hint of this already, where if choosing the Pan Am ending, you get the Aldecaldo jacket, or going with the Rogue ending, you get the Gravity boots or an Afterlife jacket. Especially in an RPG game, it would have been nice to know that the decisions that I made within game really affect my gameplay experience. Another thing worth mentioning is how you're locked into first person, which again takes away from the RPG elements. I won't get too in depth into it, but I do think that because of it, I did lose a lot of that connection with V. Alright, finally for the last player type, which are the Explorers. Now we're going to break this down into two parts. One is exploring the world within Cyberpunk 2077 and exploring the mechanics of the game. Starting off with exploring Night City, I think this is where the game shines the most. Each district in Night City had its own personality, whether it be downtown with its underground market to the industrial district with all the fighting rinks, or the high rises with multiple levels to explore, or the Badlands at the outskirts of town with its large open dirt roads. Each area felt wildly unique. What's really cool is that with each side quest that you encounter, you get to explore different parts of the city. And because each quest takes part in a different part of the city, it always felt like a new adventure. You meet new characters and their stories, giving life to Night City. Also because there's so many decisions to make within the game which affect the outcomes of the interactions that you have, like how you can get different endings depending on who you aligned with. Each experience is different from player to player. If you really enjoy playing games to escape and experience new worlds, this is definitely the game to play. I'd say the one and only downside when exploring the world is the AI. Some of the NPCs in the game are reskinned with the same voice lines and animations, with very little interactions. Next is exploring the mechanics of the game. This includes things like the skill trees, the weapon perks, cyberware, and making builds. Very similar to other categories, I really feel like the base mechanics were there. It is really fun making different builds with combinations of weapons, perks, and cyberware. But one of the main gripes that I had was that there were a lot of bugs with these core mechanics. Usually I don't mind bugs within the game, like crashes or animation glitches. But when it does affect the core mechanics, breaking specific perks or mods which I acquired within game with money or attribute points which I can't get back, that's when I have a problem. You know when it's a problem when people have to make content explaining which skills work and don't work, or which mods can or can't stack, or keeping an updated list of which pieces of cyberware are fixed with each patch. And I say this would be better if we had ways to reset our attribute points, or if there was easier ways to make money. But because these resources are pretty scarce, if you find out afterwards that something doesn't work, it's pretty much irreversible. I think overall though, with all the weapons, perks, skills, and cyberware that you can use, it does provide a multitude of combinations that you can use together. Although there isn't much synergy between each, and sometimes they aren't explained the best within the menu systems, I did have a decent time creating new builds and understanding how to min-max my character. To summarize everything and give it a rating, going back to the socializers, around 30% of the game will satisfy socializer player types. The voice acting and the character development were great, and I think really progressed the story. But because of infrequent interactions with these characters, I give a socializer rating of 8 out of 10. Onto the killers. Depending on how much you seeked out combat, I'd say around 25% of your time playing Cyberpunk 2077 caters to killer player types. The weapons that you use, the equipment and cyberware that the player used was pretty fun, but the enemies lacked diversity and each encounter felt the same. So with that, I give a killer rating of 6 out of 10. Next are the achievers. If we are counting iconic weapons as collectibles, I'd say 5% of your time playing the game will satisfy achiever player types, but because these iconic weapons are simply rewards for completing a mission, or can simply be found somewhere in the world, I'd give this a achiever rating of 1. Finally, for the explorer player type, I think most of the game is spent exploring either the world or the mechanics within the game, so around 40% of your time playing Cyberpunk will satisfy the explorer player type. Exploring the world was awesome, with all the side quests that lead you to different parts of Night City, as well as the unique districts with different characters encountered within each. However, exploring the mechanics of the game, although it was fun to make builds with all the different weapons, perks, and cyberware, the multitude of bugs, which had perks and abilities not even work, and the irreversible decisions if making the wrong choice, overall I'd give an explorer rating of 7 out of 10. Finally, we'll average these ratings out depending on the percentage of the game that satisfies the player type, which gives our total Cyberpunk 2077 rating to 6.75 out of 10. Again, this is a rating taking into account all player types, but since every player is different, you may value one part of the game better than others. I truly did enjoy playing the game, as I'm primarily an explorer player, and just experiencing the world that Cyberpunk 2077 provides is really what I cherish most about the game. And that's it for my review on Cyberpunk 2077. I hope that you guys found this helpful, and if you did, please drop a like, and if you disagree or agree with me, let me know in the comment section down below, because I really enjoy hearing other people's opinions about the game. As always, thank you guys for watching. Hope to catch you next one, and GG.